To the future! Tyler roared, raising a glass of 20-year-old single malt scotch that belonged to my father. The fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting long, dancing shadows across the timber walls of our ancestral cabin. I just got the final permits approved this morning, he announced, his voice booming with the unearned confidence of a man who has never faced a real consequence in his life. We rip out this dusty old interior, put in glass walls, heated floors, and by spring, we flip this place for a $780,000 profit. My father, David, clapped him on the back, beaming. My sister, Sarah, looked at her husband like he was a god. I sat in the corner, nursing a lukewarm coffee, saying absolutely nothing, because what Tyler didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the deed to this cabin was currently sitting in a fireproof safe in my apartment 3 hours away, and my name had been on it for 5 years. Before we watch Tyler's house of cards come crashing down, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The cheering inside the cabin was deafening. It wasn't just happiness. It was relief. My father saw Tyler's vision as salvation, a way to turn a stagnant family asset into a legacy of wealth. He looked at Tyler's flashy suit and loud promises and saw competence. He looked at me in my gray sweater, silent and observant, and saw nothing. Just Ashley. The quiet one. The accountant. The one who didn't have vision. My phone buzzed against my thigh. A single, sharp vibration that cut through the noise. I pulled it out, shielding the screen from the room. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. Are you Ashley? I'm Antonio. I'm standing outside your cabin, and your brother-in-law owes me $18,000. My stomach dropped, but my face remained perfectly still. Years of forensic accounting had taught me one thing: never show your cards until the trap is set. I stood up, slipping through the French doors out onto the porch. The cold mountain air hit me like a slap, freezing the breath in my lungs. It was snowing, heavy flakes drifting down into the black pine forest. I looked back through the glass. Inside, my father was pouring Tyler another drink. Sarah was laughing, her hand on Tyler's arm. It was a perfect tableau of a happy family, anchored by a lie, and it forced me to confront the question I had buried for years. Why? Why did my father believe the loud liar over the quiet doer? It is a trap that families like ours fall into so easily, the trap of normalizing cruelty. We mistake confidence for competence. We mistake silence for absence. Tyler was a master of performance. He filled the room with noise, with energy, with the appearance of success. And because he demanded attention, he got respect. I, on the other hand, demanded nothing. I fixed the problems in the dark. I paid the bills quietly. And because I made it look easy, because I made the problems disappear without fanfare, my father assumed there were no problems at all. He didn't value the safety I provided. He valued the excitement Tyler promised. I looked down at the phone again. I'm outside, I typed back. I'm coming down. I wasn't just walking out into the snow to meet a contractor. I was walking out of the role they had assigned me. The quiet daughter was done. The forensic accountant was clocking in. The next morning, I sat in a booth at the only diner in town, watching steam rise from a black coffee. Antonio walked in 2 minutes late, looking exhausted and carrying a thick manila folder. He didn't look like a scammer. He looked like a man who had bills to pay and a bad feeling in his gut. He slid into the booth without a greeting and pushed his phone across the table. He said he wanted an open concept, Antonio said, his voice rough. So we started demolition on the interior walls yesterday. I looked at the screen, and for a moment, I forgot to breathe. The photo showed the great room, the vintage timber framing the hand-hewn beams my mother had loved. The ones she used to trace with her fingertips while she read by the fire were gone, ripped out, piled in a dumpster like garbage. Tyler hadn't just renovated the cabin. He had gutted its heart. He had erased the history of this family to make room for generic, modern aesthetics that would look good on a listing brochure. The anger that flared in my chest wasn't hot. it was absolute zero. I reached into my bag and pulled out my own folder. "Antonio," I said, my voice steady. "Tyler Collins does not own that cabin. He has never owned it. He has never paid a dime in property taxes, and he certainly didn't inherit it." I slid the deed across the chipped laminate table. The date stamp was from 5 years ago. "I bought it," I explained, watching his eyes widen as he read the legal text. "When my mother passed, my father stopped opening his mail. The grief paralyzed him. The bank was 3 weeks away from foreclosure. My siblings, Sarah and Tyler, were too busy living their loud, expensive lives to notice that our legacy was drowning in debt. So I stepped in. I didn't tell him the rest. I didn't tell him how I used my entire savings to clear the arrears, how I quietly transferred the title to my name to protect the asset from my father's creditors, how I let my father continue to believe it was the family cabin because taking his dignity felt like a cruelty I couldn't commit. I had been the silent investor in their happiness for half a decade. And this was my repayment, my brother-in-law tearing down my walls to build his own ego. "He lied to you," I said, pointing to the deed. "And he destroyed my property. You are going to stop working immediately, and you are going to give me every single text message, email, and voicemail he has sent you." Antonio looked at the deed, then at the photo of the destroyed beams, then at me. "He owes me $18,000 for materials," he whispered. "He owes you a lot more than that," I said. "But right now, he's about to find out that the landlord is home." I drove back down the mountain with the evidence in the passenger seat, my mind shifting gears from defense to offense. But before I could pull the trigger, I had to give my sister one chance. Sarah was the optimist of the family, the one who believed in vision boards and manifesting destiny. I needed to know if she was a co-conspirator or just another victim. We met at a coffee shop near her house. She walked in glowing, radiating the kind of manic happiness that usually precedes a crash. "Can you believe it?" she gushed, grabbing my hands across the table. "Tyler says the pre-sale interest is insane. We're going to be rich, Ashley. Finally." I pulled my hands back. "Sarah, listen to me." I went up to the cabin. "Tyler is destroying it." She waved her hand dismissively. "He's updating it. You have to break a few eggs, right?" "It's just old wood." "It's not his to update," I said, keeping my voice low. "And it's not just the cabin. I spoke to the contractor. Tyler hasn't paid him. He's $18,000 in the hole, Sarah." Her smile faltered, but then it hardened into something brittle. "He's managing the cash flow. These things are complicated. You wouldn't understand. You're so risk-averse." "I understand that he forged permits," I said. "And I understand that he doesn't own the property." "He's handling it!" she snapped, her voice rising. "Why can't you just be happy for us? Why do you always have to be the wet blanket? You're just jealous because Tyler has big ideas and you're stuck in your spreadsheets." Then she dropped the bomb that turned my concern into ice. "We took out a second mortgage on our house," she said, lifting her chin defiantly, "to bridge the gap until the cabin sells. Tyler said it was a sure thing. He said we needed skin in the game." I stared at her. She had leveraged the roof over her children's heads to fund a renovation on a house I owned, based on a lie told by a man who couldn't pay a contractor. Tyler hadn't just scammed a stranger. He had weaponized my sister's trust to dig her a financial grave. "He lied to you," I said softly. "You're just trying to ruin this," she hissed, standing up. "You've always been jealous of him. Stay out of our way, Ashley." She stormed out, leaving me alone with the cold coffee and the terrible clarity of what had to happen next. I wasn't just fighting for a cabin anymore. I was fighting to keep my sister from becoming homeless. The sister was gone. The forensic accountant was the only one left at the table. I didn't go home to cry. I went home to work. I sat at my dining table, opened my laptop, and logged into the databases that most people don't even know exist. Sarah thought I was jealous. My father thought I was passive. They were about to learn that Ashley the accountant wasn't just a job title. It was a threat assessment. I started with a standard asset search. Tyler Collins. The results populated the screen in a waterfall of red text. It wasn't just bad. It was catastrophic. Tyler didn't have a portfolio. He had a sinkhole. $57,600. That was the current tally of his unsecured debt. It wasn't a mortgage or student loans. It was maxed out credit cards, online gambling losses, and payments on a luxury car lease he couldn't afford. He was paying the minimums on 6 different cards, juggling balances like a clown on a unicycle. He was drowning. And like a drowning man, he had grabbed the nearest buoyant object, my sister, and pulled her under with him. The second mortgage on Sarah's house wasn't an investment strategy. It was a life raft. He had burned through their equity to pay off his bookie or his Amex, and now he needed the cabin flip to cover the hole before the ground collapsed beneath them. I printed every page. Bankruptcies in 2014. A lien on a previous business venture. It was a pattern of failure masked by charisma. But while the digital paper trail was damning, it wasn't enough to stop him instantly. To get the police involved, to get an immediate arrest that would physically remove him from my property before he did more damage, I needed proof of criminal intent. I needed to prove he wasn't just a bad businessman, but a thief. I grabbed my coat and keys. The digital audit was complete. It was time for the physical inspection. I drove back up the winding mountain road, the tires crunching on the fresh snow. The silence in the car was heavy, filled only by the hum of the engine and the cold realization that my brother-in-law wasn't just a liar, he was a parasite. The cabin was silent when I arrived. Antonio had followed my instructions perfectly. The work site was abandoned. The front door was unlocked. Tyler's arrogance apparently didn't extend to basic security. I stepped inside, the smell of sawdust and drywall dust hitting me instantly. It looked like a war zone. The walls I had painted with my mother were stripped to the studs. The floorboards were covered in debris. But I didn't stop in the main room. I walked straight to the master bedroom, to the spot above the fireplace where a large oil painting of the Rockies used to hang. The painting was on the floor, leaning against the wall. The wall safe behind it, a small, vintage box installed by my grandfather in the 60s, was wide open. I froze, my breath hitched in my throat. I walked over, my boots echoing on the subfloor, and peered inside. Empty. The velvet pouches were gone. My mother's vintage jewelry collection, the sapphire brooch she wore to weddings, the pearl string from her grandmother, the gold locket with my father's picture, all of it, gone. I leaned against the cold stone of the fireplace, a wave of nausea rolling over me. This wasn't just renovation fraud. This was grand larceny, but as the forensic accountant in my brain took over, the pieces clicked into a terrifying psychological profile. This is the nature of the narcissistic injury. Tyler didn't steal the jewelry just because he needed $57,000. He stole it because he needed the costume of a successful man. He couldn't bear the psychological wound of being seen as a failure, as less than. So he looted our history to pay for his present. He pawned my mother's legacy to buy the appearance of wealth, the champagne, the suits, the contractor deposits. He would rather be a criminal than be ordinary. He would rather destroy my family than admit he was broke. This was the point of no return. He hadn't just made a bad business deal. He had violated the sanctuary of the people who loved him. He had stolen the physical memory of my mother to feed his ego. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the empty safe. Then I called the local precinct. "I need to report a burglary," I said, my voice as cold as the mountain air. "And I know exactly who did it." The sister who hesitated at the coffee shop was gone. The woman standing in the wreckage of her mother's bedroom was ready to burn the house down to save it. 2 hours later, the snow was falling in sheets, a white curtain isolating the cabin from the rest of the world. But inside, the lights were blazing. Tyler wasn't hiding. He was doubling down. Through the window, I could see him pacing the great room, gesturing wildly to my father and a stranger in a suit, likely the private investor he was trying to scam for a bridge loan to cover his debts before the law caught up. He was trying to sell a house he didn't own to pay off a debt he couldn't service. It was the final, desperate spin of the roulette wheel. I didn't knock. I used my key, the one I had carried on my keychain for 5 years, unnoticed by everyone. The door swung open, letting in a gust of freezing wind. The conversation died instantly. Tyler spun around, his closer smile faltering for a fraction of a second before he tried to recover. "Ashley!" "Great timing. We're just wrapping up some." "No," I said, my voice cutting through his noise like a blade. "We are closing." I stepped aside. Behind me, Antonio walked in, looking grim. And behind him, 2 uniformed officers from the county sheriff's department. The color drained from Tyler's face so fast he looked like a ghost. "What is this? A prank?" "Ashley, this is a business meeting. It's an intervention," I said, walking to the table where he had spread out his fake blueprints. I dropped a heavy file folder onto the wood. It landed with the dull thud of a gavel. "This is the deed to the property," I said, pointing to the first document. "Registered in my name, purchased from the estate 5 years ago. These are the building permits you forged. The permit numbers belong to a parking garage in Denver. And this." I pulled out the pawn shop receipts I had retrieved from the police report database an hour ago. "This is the ticket for Mom's sapphire brooch. And her pearl string. And the gold locket." The silence in the room was absolute. My father, David, picked up the pawn receipt. His hands were shaking. He looked at the date stamp 3 days ago. Then he looked at Tyler. The hero worship in his eyes died, replaced by a horror so deep it looked like physical pain. "You stole her jewelry?" my father whispered. "To pay for." "What?" "For the appearance," I answered for him. Because looking rich was more important to him than being honest. Tyler crumbled. The arrogance evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, small man. He turned to my sister, Sarah, who was standing by the kitchen island, clutching her stomach. "Sarah, baby, tell them. Tell them it's a misunderstanding. I can fix this. I just need a little time." Sarah looked at him, then at me, and for the first time in her life, she didn't make an excuse for him. She stepped back. "Mr. Collins," the officer said, stepping forward. "You're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and grand larceny." As the handcuffs clicked, Tyler started screaming, blaming the market, blaming the contractor, blaming me. But as they dragged him out into the snowstorm, his voice faded, swallowed by the wind. The cabin was finally quiet. The glass castle had shattered. A week later, the only sound in the cabin was the rhythmic rasp of sandpaper. Antonio was working on the timber frames, carefully restoring the wood Tyler had tried to cover up. It smelled like cedar and sawdust, the smell of healing. My father sat in the armchair by the fire. He looked older, deflated. The illusion that had sustained him, the idea that his son-in-law was a titan of industry, was gone. "I owe you an apology," he said, staring into the flames. "I listened to him because he was loud. I ignored you because you were quiet. I thought you didn't care about this place." I sat down opposite him. I didn't offer him tea or comfort. I offered him the truth. "Dad, look at this place," I said gently. "If I hadn't bought this cabin 5 years ago, the bank would have foreclosed on it. It would be a rental property for strangers right now. If I hadn't stepped in last week, Tyler would have leveraged Sarah's house into foreclosure too. You would be destitute. Sarah would be homeless. The jewelry would be gone forever. This is the reality of the world without the quiet ones. If I hadn't been the silent guardian, the safety net he didn't know existed, the family legacy would have been sold for scrap metal to pay for Tyler's ego." "My silence wasn't absence, Dad," I said. "It was a shield." He nodded slowly, tears tracking through the lines on his face. "I see you now, Ashley. I see you." Later that afternoon, I stood on the newly restored deck. The sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of violet and gold. The jewelry was back in the safe I had paid to retrieve it myself. Sarah had filed for divorce and was staying with me until she got on her feet. The cabin was secure. I wrapped my hands around a hot mug of coffee and took a deep breath of the thin, clean mountain air. Ethan had wanted to flip this view for a quick profit to show the world how smart he was. Instead, he showed the world exactly who he was. And I had stopped him without raising my voice. I watched the first stars appear above the tree line. Sometimes, the quietest victories are the most complete. If this story reminded you that the quietest people often hold the most power, hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, would you have pressed charges against family or let them walk away?